Hi guys, it's Rob here with your latest Unity tutorial, and today we're going to be taking a look at colliders in Unity. Some topics we're going to touch on: the definition of a collider, how to add a collider, how to edit a collider, removing a collider, and then I'm going to show you some examples of collider usage if there's time. So we'll jump right in. Let's say we have this quad object here, and let's say well, first, what is the definition of a collider? A collider is when you have an object in Unity, a game object, that you want to be able to detect collision with to any other object. So basically, all of your collision detection is done through colliders. So if one of the objects, for example, if you have a bullet shooting at a spaceship, and you want that bullet, when it hits the spaceship, to destroy the spaceship, or at least for the game to recognize that that bullet's touched that spaceship, then both the bullet and the spaceship are going to need colliders on them. A lack of colliders on either of the objects is going to make the game not recognize that one has touched the other. A collider is used for any type of collision within the Unity engine. So we'll take a look at adding a collider now. We would go to Add Component. In this case, we would go to Physics, and then we'd go to Box Collider. And what that would do, that just added a new box collider to our quad object that we're on. Now, if we wanted to edit this collider, we would come down here, we would click on Edit Collider, and now you see this thing pops up where you're able to scale this collider. See these little scale buttons here, and what you're able to do with those, you can just manipulate them however you want. And remember, wherever you put this collider, if I put this collider here, then remember, the game's not going to detect this right half of this object here. It's only going to detect this left half. But if I pull this collider out to here, now the game's detecting this whole quad object. Most of you guys, if you're in the IT 265 class, you'll probably be, or 201 class, you'll be working with 2D colliders. The only thing to be careful of with those, when you're applying them to 2D objects, is you can't mix and match. So if you have a regular box collider like these on, you can't put a 2D collider on. In the same sense, if you have an object with a 2D collider on it, you can't mix and match and put a 3D rigid body or 3D collider on it. Each object's components can only be of one type, either 2D or 3D. So now in order to remove this component, we would just click on this little Tools button here, and we would go Remove Component. And now we've removed it. As you can tell, I have another box collider up here for the official game. I just wanted to show you that example. And now, I believe there's one more topic. Okay, examples of collider usage. For example, if you're making a space shooter, and you want to detect not only when the player shoots the enemy, but when the enemy shoots the player, well, the player is going to need a collider on him. The player's bullet is going to need a collider on it. The enemy is going to need a collider on it to detect when that bullet is hitting that enemy, when the two colliders collide with each other. And in the same sense, the enemy's bullet is going to need a collider on it so that when it hits the player, the two colliders hit into each other and the engine detects a collision. Another example would be if you're in if you're making a platformer game, if you're developing one of those, then you'd want to put a collider on the platforms that both the player can jump on and also the player itself, so that when the player jumps on that object, the Unity engine detects a collision, detects that the player has now hit onto that platform, and that he's now there. He's not just going to fall straight down after he's just jumped onto that. So in order for the engine to detect a collision, you need a collider not only both on the colliding object, but on the object that it's colliding with. So basically, if in a house, let's say, you are able to collide with a wall, which means that you technically have a collider on you, and the wall has a collider. So every object in your house would technically have a collider on it. If you're making, for example, a game where you're going through a house, every object that you're going to hit into would have a collider on it, unless you wanted the player to pass through that object and the game not to detect any sort of collision. There's also rigid bodies, which deal less with collision and more with the object being an object of matter, having mass to it, having a defined size. And for the game engine to actually recognize that as an object. For example, if there was a magazine that the player didn't need to collide with, but that you want it to actually be an object in there, you would add a rigid body to it. And rigid bodies will be on our next tutorial. See you guys then. Thanks.